Based on what? That tattered notebook over there. You are just trying to find a reason to make yourself look important, Lieutenant Voss sneered, poking his finger into Arthur Grimes's chest with disdain. He was under the delusion that the $1 million AI system was the ultimate authority, while he was just a piece of useless waste blocking the way with a tattered notebook. His brazen laughter echoed throughout the summit shooting range, considering the trampling of blood-bought experience to be the privilege of those who hold technology. But just a few seconds later, the situation reversed spectacularly. When he challenged him to shoot a target at 1,200 meters to humiliate him, that very scrap metal gun roared, tearing apart the hydraulic system, causing the steel target to collapse completely, along with the arrogant smile on his lips. The entire shooting range fell dead silent. It turned out, he was not a senile old man. He was Arthur Grimes, a master of ballistics, the only person to see through the fatal 2 deviation of a sophisticated assassination. When the screen turned red and the machine guns rotated their barrels toward the stands, the arrogant officer suddenly shrank back, trembling and pathetically cowardly, behind the shadow of the old veteran. State-of-the-art technology does not give birth to warriors. It only exposes the weaklings hiding in the shadow of algorithms. Please share this story if you believe that true class does not lie in soulless lines of code, but lies in human metal, the only thing standing firm to protect the truth when the screen goes dark. The Summit Experimental Shooting Range reigned atop the Colorado Range like a steel fortress, challenging nature. This place was not built to train ordinary soldiers, but was designed as a cathedral of defense technology, where physical limits were redefined by algorithms. Mountain winds at this altitude never blew in a fixed direction. They slammed into vertical cliffs, tearing space into the most chaotic and unpredictable air currents. But inside the VIP grandstand area wrapped in thick bulletproof glass, the harshness of nature was completely eliminated. Corporate executives and government officials sat on plush leather chairs, enjoying the ideal air-conditioned temperature. They did not hold binoculars to observe targets like previous generations. Instead, in their hands were the latest tablets, continuously updating performance charts, wind drift, and hit probabilities calculated in detail down to every 1,000th of a second. Here, the explosion of gunpowder did not carry the color of violence or the smell of death. It was the sound signaling a commercial contract about to be signed. Each hit on target was a dancing profit figure, and every deviation was converted into human liability to honor the perfection of machines. Arthur Grimes appeared amidst that flashy and sterile setting, like a rough scratch on a mirrored glass surface. His old pickup truck skidded to a stop at the edge of the parking lot. The engine, coughing a few heavy times before shutting off completely, breathing out a thin trail of gray smoke lost among the fleet of luxurious electric cars of the guests. Grimes stepped out of the vehicle with a limp, the aftermath of a shrapnel piece lodged in his pelvis from many decades ago. He wore a red plaid flannel shirt frayed at the cuffs and elbows, his head topped with a baseball cap faded by sun and wind. His image created a stark contrast with the crowd of technicians wearing pristine white lab coats and young officers smelling of expensive cologne walking busily back and forth. Grimes was a freelance ballistics consultant, a name that once struck fear into enemies on the battlefield, but was now just a mandatory administrative procedure in the acceptance process of the Department of Defense. He stood dwarfed among modern measuring equipment, his hand not holding a tablet but clutching a tattered leather-bound notebook. The paper edges curled and turned yellow. A young technician standing nearby nudged his colleague's arm, his eyes revealing clear mockery as he glanced at the primitive item in the old veteran's hand. He whispered loud enough for giggles to spread around. "Look at that. Is he planning to use pen and paper to check the AI the Stone Age has returned?" Grimes heard it all but did not bother to lift his head. He was too used to being considered a living relic, an antique needing preservation rather than an expert with real combat value. He trudged toward the security control area. Following a professional habit ingrained in his blood, he brought his index finger to his mouth to wet it with a bit of saliva, then raised it high to feel the wind direction. But just as his finger touched the freezing cold air current, a large security guard with a headset attached to his ear stepped up to block the way. This person looked at Grimes's disheveled appearance with suspicion mixed with disdain. "Excuse me, sir. This area is only for personnel with high-tech keycards." Grimes slowly reached into his pants pocket, pulling out a laminated plastic identification card that was stained. The corner of the card, still sticking with a smear of old gun oil, On the card, the title, Independent Ballistics Consultant, lay faded beneath the bright red seal of the military from the Cold War era. The security guard took the card, flipping it over and over as if holding a strange object from another planet, then frowned and muttered with a look of question. The Department of Defense still hires people like this for acceptance testing. After a while of communicating via walkie-talkie to verify, he reluctantly stepped aside, but his eyes still followed him with vigilance, as if afraid he would dirty the carpet. Grimes walked past the checkpoint. Striking his eyes was a giant LED screen erected in the middle of the main stage. The Aerotech Corporation logo appeared sparkling with a dominant blue tone. Underneath was a proudly running slogan, Eagle Eye ending the era of human error. The large lettering was like a direct declaration of war against the blood-bought experience that Grimes had accumulated his entire life. He stopped, opened the notebook, and began writing. The numbers he wrote down were not data from the server, but observations about the movement of the vegetation around. Grimes noticed the weeds growing at the edge of the cliff did not bow in a unified direction. They spiraled. The wind here did not go straight, but it curled due to sudden pressure changes rising from the bottom of the abyss. The sound of cooling fans from dozens of high-power servers hummed in his ears, but he still muttered his assessment in his throat. The wind here does not go straight. It curls. His remark was quickly swallowed by the noise of the crowd and the sound of machinery operating. No one cared about the words of a senile old man when modern sensors were reporting perfect parameters. The atmosphere suddenly became more tense and solemn when the loudspeaker system rang out a piercing sound, cutting off every murmuring conversation. Lieutenant Voss stepped out from the wings with the air of a conqueror, each footstep striking the metal floor to create sharp, powerful sounds. The spotlight from the high ceiling shone straight down, enveloping him in a brilliant artificial aura, highlighting a crisp uniform without a single wrinkle, and shiny medals pinned neatly on his left chest. Voss's face exuded a cold handsomeness, his eyes burning with the ambition of a young officer standing before the threshold of ultimate power. He was the embodiment of a new generation that believed technology was God and algorithms were scripture. Voss stood still on the high podium, enjoying the respectful silence of the crowd below, where old generals and corporate executives were waiting for a technological miracle. He adjusted the microphone clip to his collar, a small movement but containing excessive confidence, then raised his voice, echoing throughout the vast space of the summit shooting range. Ladies and gentlemen, forget about flesh and blood marksmen. Humans get tired, they shake, and they make mistakes. Eagle Eye does not. Voss's opening words were like a bucket of cold water splashed onto the face of traditional military values. He moved with agility on the stage, his hands gesticulating to the rhythm of a carefully rehearsed presentation. The large screen behind his back continuously changed images, projecting slow-motion videos of soldiers sweating, squinting in the bush, or trembling from the cold, leading to missed shots. Contrasting with that were three-dimensional graphics simulating the Eagle Eye system with straight bullet trajectories, piercing through every obstacle with absolute precision. Voss was selling a dream of perfection, where war became as clean and efficient as an industrial production line. He spoke of eliminating the human element, as if talking about excising a malignant tumor, his tone full of contempt for the biological limits of his own species. Caught in the intoxication of his speech, Voss suddenly stopped. He turned his body, pointing his hand toward a dark corner of the shooting range, where Arthur Grimes was standing leaning against a rusty steel pillar. The attention of the entire grandstand immediately poured toward the elderly veteran. Grimes stood there, dwarfed in the shadows, his hand still clutching the old notebook, his demeanor silent, like an ancient rock, amidst the rushing current of technology. Voss smirked, a half-smile full of condescension. And to prove that, we have invited Mr. Grimes here, a 10 legend. According to old textbooks, Voss deliberately emphasized the word old with a prolonged intonation, turning the title of legend into a stinging sarcasm. He was turning Grimes into an exhibit, a living example of the obsolescence he wanted to erase. Below the stage, the young recruits began to laugh aloud. The laughter spread quickly like a wave, carrying the mockery of those who grew up with touchscreens and had never known the smell of real gunpowder. They looked at Grimes like one looks at a typewriter in the era of supercomputers, an interesting but useless antique. Pitying and dismissive eyes poured onto the veteran, but Grimes kept his expression calm. He stood still, his cloudy eyes silently observing Voss, like an old hunter, observing prey that was dancing drunkenly without knowing the trap was already set. Voss stepped down from the high podium, heading straight toward Grimes. The sound of his boot soles striking the concrete floor got closer and closer. carrying the invisible pressure of one who holds the power over life and death. He stopped right in front of the veteran, the distance so close that Grimes could smell the expensive cologne, heavily overpowering the smell of machine oil of the shooting range. Voss turned off the microphone, his face of social friendliness disappearing completely, replaced by a sharp and cruel look. He leaned in, bringing his face close to Grimes's ear and whispering, his voice hissing through his teeth enough for only the two of them to hear. "Old man, today, you just need to stand there, nod, and sign the papers. Don't get in my way." Voss's warning was not merely an order. It was an affirmation of status. To him, Grimes was just a straw scarecrow needed to legitimize the process of dispersing billions of dollars. He did not need his expertise. He only needed his signature on the acceptance report to pave the way for lucrative contracts with the Department of Defense. The presence of Grimes, with his notebook and eyes squinting to watch the wind, was an insult to Voss's absolute faith in algorithms. Grimes slowly raised his head, looking straight into the eyes of the young officer. In those eyes, there was no fear or submission that Voss expected. Instead, there was a profound stillness, the stillness of someone who had once lain motionless for 3 days and 3 nights in the jungle to wait for a single moment. Grimes spoke, his voice deep and hoarse, carrying the weight of thousands of hours of field combat. Machines are only good at calculating what is fed into them. They do not know how to feel. Grimes's sentence was concise but contained the philosophy of a lifetime holding a gun. He was talking about something that no chip could copy: the intuition of life and death, the ability to listen to the breath of the wind and the heartbeat of the earth. But to Voss, those were just the delirious words of a senile man refusing to accept the changing of the times. He chuckled, patting Grimes on the shoulder like patting a child trying to explain Santa Claus. That pat contained extreme contempt, lowering the dignity of the person opposite to the lowest level. "Feel I have sensors measuring humidity, pressure, wind speed every millisecond. How much does your feeling sell for?" Voss unleashed a challenge, his tone full of cruel pragmatism. In his world, everything was converted into data and money. Invisible things like instinct or experience had no place on Aerotech's balance sheet. He believed he had cornered Grimes, stripping away all his past glory and exposing the nakedness of a washed-up old man. Satisfied with having suppressed the veteran, Voss turned abruptly back toward the formation of rookie marksmen, waiting for orders. He took a deep breath, regaining his commanding aura of authority, his voice ringing out full of excitement through the loudspeaker system, waking up the entire shooting range that was sinking in anticipation. "You guys, turn on the system. Show him what the future looks like." As soon as the order ended, a series of electronic startup sounds rang out simultaneously, creating a symphony of high technology. The recruits quickly operated on the smart scopes attached to the rifles. The large screen behind Voss immediately switched scenes, displaying live the user interface of the Eagle Eye system. It was a masterpiece of interface design, neat, sharp, and full of information. A digital green crosshair appeared, locking tight onto the target at a distance of 600 meters. It was strangely stable, without a single bit of shaking, even though the wind outside was screaming. Lines of data ran along both sides of the screen at dizzying speed, displaying every environmental parameter in detail: air humidity, barrel temperature, terrain inclination, and most importantly, the wind vector calculated for automatic compensation. The lush green numbers danced as if hypnotizing the viewers, promising an absolutely perfect result. No skills needed, no experience needed. Just place the crosshair on the target and let the algorithm do the rest. The VIP grandstand erupted with murmurs of admiration. They saw on the screen, not a gun, but a money-printing machine, an absolutely safe solution for future wars. Voss stood in the middle of the stage, his arms spread wide, as if wanting to embrace the admiration of the crowd. He glanced at Grimes one last time, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of someone knowing he was about to end this play with a fulfilling conclusion. Everything was programmed, every variable was controlled. He was certain that the first volley would lodge into the bullseye like a death sentence for Grimes's manual method, burying forever the notebooks and the feeling of shooting into the ashes of history. The atmosphere in the shooting range was as taut as a string, every eye glued to the display screen. Voss inhaled deeply the thin air on the mountaintop, gathering all his strength into his chest to shout the decisive command, "Fire." As soon as Lieutenant Voss's fire command ended, a series of dry explosions rang out simultaneously, tearing apart the thin atmosphere on the mountaintop. The sound of high-tech rifles was not like the fierce roaring of traditional weapons. They sounded neat and sharp like metal striking metal in an automated production line. 5 bullets, guided by the world's smartest algorithm, rushed out of the barrels, tearing through the wind toward the targets at a distance of 600 meters. On the large screen, 5 green dots signaled that the bullets had left the barrels and were traveling on the expected trajectory. Everyone on the grandstand, from weather-beaten generals to executive directors, held their breath, waiting for the crisp sound of metal hitting metal, the sound signaling absolute precision, and also the ringing bell signaling money had arrived in the account. However, in response to that expectation was a deadly silence. No sound of metal rang out. Instead, 5 clouds of brownish-gray dust erupted from the ground behind the row of targets. The bullets had embedded themselves into the earth, forming a straight line of holes but deviated clearly to the left compared to the targets. The steel target still stood brazenly, arrogantly, and intact, as if mocking the complacency of humans and machines. The mountain wind seemed to blow harder, carrying blinding dust to cover up the humiliating failure that had just taken place right before the eyes of hundreds of important figures. On the command podium, Voss's triumphant smile froze. He blinked continuously, staring at the display screen that was still reporting the line, "Target eliminated," flashing in a mocking green color. The disparity between naked reality and the phantom report made his brain numb in an instant. His face flushed red, spreading from his neck up to his ears. Anger and shame blended together to form a chaotic emotion. Voss grabbed the walkie-talkie, screaming in a broken voice, shattering the stunned silence of the entire shooting range. "What the hell is this?" Eagle Eye reported a hit. "Why didn't the targets fall? Check the target sensors immediately." Without waiting for an answer from the technical team, Voss threw the walkie-talkie onto the control console, walking quickly down to the shooting area with menacing steps. He needed a reason, a scapegoat, to explain this unacceptable incident, and his eyes stopped on the young recruits who were looking at each other in confusion. To Voss, machines were created from mathematical perfection. They could not be wrong. If there was an error, it certainly stemmed from the human factor, the weakest link in the operational chain. He rushed to the nearest soldier, snatching the rifle from his hand roughly. He shoved his face close to the small screen attached to the gun body, checking the operation history with a spiteful look. The shooter's biological indicators appeared, showing an elevated heart rate and slight hand tremors. Voss acted as if he had found a lifeline. He turned to shout, saliva spitting onto the face of the young soldier who was pale with fear. "It's because of you guys. The sensors reported your hands were shaking. You didn't hold the guns steady." The young soldier stammered, trying to explain in panic. He knew he had followed every procedure correctly, had held his breath, had rested his shoulder in the correct posture that the manual required. "But Lieutenant, I kept exactly to the AI's instructions." The crosshair locked green. "Only then did I pull the trigger." "Shut up," Voss cut him off with a growl, his voice full of imposing authority. He did not accept any excuse threatening his absolute faith in the system. AI is never wrong. It calculates 1,000 times faster than your brains. It's because you guys couldn't keep up with the algorithm. You flinched when squeezing the trigger. You don't deserve to hold this weapon. Voss continued to pour his rage onto the heads of the subordinate soldiers, turning them into human shields for his injured honor. He believed that if he shouted loud enough, he could cover up the truth that million-dollar technology had just failed against an invisible wind. The crowd on the grandstand began to whisper. Suspicious glances started to appear. Just then, a deep, husky voice rang out, not loud but heavy enough to cut through Voss's string of curses. "The computer is wrong." Arthur Grimes stepped out of the shadowy area. He walked slowly, the sound of old shoes striking the ground, sounding gritty, full of fatigue but determination. He did not look at Voss, nor did he look at the flashing screens. His gaze was directed straight toward the deep ravine in the distance, where cold air currents were curling up. Voss whipped around, his eyes bulging and bloodshot. He was looking for a place to vent his anger, and Grimes's interference at this moment was no different from pouring oil on the fire. "What did you say?" Grimes stopped beside the shooting platform, pointing a calloused finger toward the space in front, where weeds were swaying to a strange rhythm. He explained, his tone calm like a teacher lecturing a disobedient student. "There is a compressed air current rising from the ravine. Eagle Eye is compensating for crosswind. It calculates the wind blowing from left to right. But in reality, the wind is traveling vertically. Cold air from the bottom of the abyss is compressed and rises straight up to the sky when hitting the cliff face. It pushes the bullet higher and deviates it to the left in a spiral path. Your computer only sees 2 dimensions, but the wind here operates in 3-dimensional space. Silence enveloped the shooting area. The young soldiers looked at Grimes with surprised eyes. They began to realize the logic in his explanation. But to Voss, this was an insult. He could not accept an old man using naked eyes daring to find fault with the world's most advanced sensor system. He stepped close to Grimes, using his height and physique to intimidate the thin veteran, his voice hissing from suppressing his rage. "You dare to lecture me about aerodynamics? Based on what? That tattered notebook over there? Or based on the vague feeling of a washed-up has-been?" Grimes did not back down at all. He looked up straight into Voss's eyes. His gaze was clear and sharp, completely contrary to the cloudiness due to age that Voss had mocked. He replied, each word slow and firm like hammer blows, nailing the truth. "Based on the grass bending down at the 600-meter mark. The grass isn't bowing to the crosswind. It is being sucked upwards. Your eyes only look at the screen, so you are blind." Grimes's last sentence was like a slap straight onto Voss's face. The 2 words "you are blind" echoed in his mind, exposing his pathetic dependence on technology. He felt stripped naked in front of subordinates and superiors. The pride of an elite officer rose stronger than ever. Voss sneered, a distorted and malicious smile. He poked his index finger hard into Grimes's chest, pushing the veteran back a step. "Old man, you are just trying to find a reason to make yourself look important. You are jealous because this world no longer needs instinctive shooters like you." Voss looked around, seeing General Holloway and the Acceptance Council on the grandstand watching the argument intently. He knew he had to do something to regain face, to prove that Grimes was just a fraud trying to sabotage the demonstration. A dark thought flashed in his mind. He would not argue with theory anymore. He would use reality itself to crush this veteran's self-esteem, turn him into a laughingstock forever, and kick him out of here. Voss turned back to look at Grimes, his eyes gleaming with a cruel challenge. He pointed at the black long gun case lying at Grimes's feet, which contained the obsolete mechanical sniper rifle he brought along for comparison. "Fine, Mr. Consultant, if you believe in instinct that much, why don't you pick up that piece of scrap metal and give it a shot?" Voss's challenge rang out amidst the windy shooting range, opening an uneven confrontation where everyone thought the outcome was already determined. Voss continued to raise his voice, forcing Grimes into a position of no retreat. "Target at 1,200 meters. If you hit, while my system missed, I will swallow this memory card. But if you miss, pack up and get out of here, and never let me see your face again." Lieutenant Voss's challenge rang out, hovering in mid-air before being swept away by the mountain wind, leaving a heavy silence blanketing the summit shooting range. The distance of 1,200 meters was not just a number. It was the boundary between human capability and divine limits in sniping. At that range, a single strong heartbeat was enough to deviate the bullet path by a whole meter, and the wind did not just blow in one direction but could change 3 times along the bullet's flight path. Voss knew this well. He gave that figure not to test ability, but to bury Arthur Grimes's honor in a deep pit of humiliation. He wanted to prove that humans of the previous century, with their primitive tools, were completely useless against the power of digital technology. Voss stepped closer to the sturdy protective case lying at Grimes's feet, which contained the rifle the veteran had brought along. He used the toe of his polished boot to lightly kick the lid of the case, the sound ringing out dry and disrespectful. He looked at Grimes with fake pity, then turned to the crowd holding their breath, watching, his voice full of mockery. "I bet you can't even lift it without breaking your back. How much does this gun weigh? 6 kilos or 7 kilos? At this age, your bones are probably even more brittle than those dry branches out there." Not giving Grimes time to react, Voss turned his body toward the VIP grandstand, where bulletproof glass panels reflected the harsh sunlight of the highlands. He spread his arms, acting like an actor presenting the climax of a play before the most powerful audience. He knew General Holloway was watching, and this was his chance to affirm that the defense budget should be poured into aerotech, not into consulting contracts with elderly veterans. Voss raised his voice, the sound echoing through the speaker system, ensuring that every word reached the ears of the Acceptance Council. "General, our expert claims that a $200,000 sensor loses to his cloudy eyes. He believes that vague intuition is more valuable than millions of lines of code written by top engineers. I propose a practical test. We don't need to argue with words. Let gunpowder judge." Voss paused for a beat to attract absolute attention, then pointed straight toward the distant mountain range, where the target was just a small dot blurring in the vapor and dust. He laid out the betting condition. A gamble he was certain he held the absolute winning hand in target at 1,200 meters. "If you hit while my system missed, I will swallow this memory card right here. I will chew it up and swallow it down to admit that my technology is trash compared to your eyes. Voss's arrogant declaration was like a match thrown into dry grass. The recruits below began to snicker. The initially tense atmosphere quickly shifted to relieved mockery. They were soldiers who grew up in the era of touchscreens and virtual assistants. They could not imagine hitting a target at a range of over a kilometer without the support of a ballistic computer being feasible. In their eyes, Grimes at this moment looked like a strange creature from the Jurassic period, a stubborn person clutching the remnants of the past. A recruit standing nearby, chiming in with his commander, added in a flippant tone, "Grandpa, be careful or you'll snap your shoulder. Antique guns don't have hydraulic recoil reduction systems." Laughter erupted, but Arthur Grimes seemed not to hear. The world around him, the sarcastic words, the contemptuous looks, the screaming wind all faded away. He quietly bent down, his knee joints creaking softly. His calloused hand touched the latch of the gun case. It was a slow and respectful gesture, like an artist opening a piano lid, or a surgeon picking up a scalpel. Click, click. Two sounds of unlatching rang out dryly. Grimes opened the lid. Lying inside the shaped foam layer was the M24 SWS sniper weapon system, the companion that had gone with him through hells on Earth that those kids only saw in movies. It did not have crisscrossing Picatinny rails, no touch screens, no tangled wires. It was just a pure combination of steel and composite materials, cold and simple. The moment Grimes's fingers touched the textured handguard, a magical transformation took place. The slight tremor of old age at his fingertips disappeared completely. His shoulders, which were sagging under the burden of time, suddenly broadened. His breathing became deep and steady. He was no longer a retired old man standing in the middle of a high-tech shooting range. He had returned to being a hunter. Voss observed Grimes from above, the smirk still not fading from his lips. Seeing Grimes operate slowly, he assumed he was clumsy. He turned to say to the assistant standing next to him, voice loud enough to mock, "Look at him. Probably trying to remember how to open the safety catch. Hope he didn't forget the ammo at home." Grimes did not reply. He lifted the rifle out of the case. His movements were smooth and decisive to the point of making the surrounding laughter gradually die down. He checked the bolt, the sound of metal sliding on each other sounding a powerful clack-clack, the sound of precision mechanics, rough and reliable. Grimes stood up straight, the M24, fitting snugly in his hands like an extension of his body. His posture was as solid as a 1,000-year-old rock on the mountain peak, exuding a cold, killing aura that made Voss involuntarily step back. Grimes walked to the shooting platform, passing by Voss. When passing the young lieutenant, he paused for a split second. He did not look at Voss's face. His eyes looked straight ahead, where the battlefield was beckoning. He spoke softly, his voice not high but sharp like a razor blade, gliding over flesh. "Prepare the memory card. Lieutenant, hope you digest well." Voss was stunned, feeling a cold chill run down his spine. He intended to open his mouth to retort, but Grimes had walked past, leaving him behind like a meaningless obstacle. Grimes advanced to the firing position. He placed the gun on the sandbag, resting the stock into the hollow of his shoulder, his cheek pressed against the cold stock, a familiarity heartbreakingly painful. He opened the optical scope cover. No electronic screen appeared, no blinking red and green parameters, only a slender black crosshair lying in the middle of the round field of view. Grimes did not rush to aim at the target. He knew the electronic target system far away could be manipulated, or simply the sensors could be inaccurate just as they were wrong in the previous volley. He needed more honest data, a language that nature uses to communicate with true marksmen. He squinted, adjusting the scope focus, not to see the target face clearly, but to look into the suspended space in front of it. Through the high-quality optical lens, Grimes saw what Eagle Eye and billions of dollars of technology had overlooked. He saw the heat mirage. Invisible waves of heat were rising from the baked ground, curling and dancing like snakes in the air. They distorted the image of the target, but at the same time, they were the most accurate wind compass. The tilt direction of those heat ripples told him exactly how the wind was blowing at each segment of the bullet path, and their speed told him how the air pressure was changing. This was living data, data that no chip could read, only eyes and blood-bought experience could decode. The noisy world around Grimes died out, leaving only him, the gun, and the heat ripples whispering the secrets of the wind. Arthur Grimes lay prone on the hard rubber shooting mat, his entire body in contact with the cold ground of the shooting range, forming a solid cohesive unit. He pressed his cheek against the composite stock of the M24, feeling the familiar coldness spreading through his wrinkled skin. a sense of safety he had not felt for many years. The pungent smell of gun oil mixed with the scent of dust rushed into his nose, awakening nerve cells that had long been asleep. The moment his eye settled into the rubber eyepiece of the scope, the noisy and flashy world around him seemed to be extinguished by an invisible switch. The sound of wind screaming through the ravines, the murmuring chatter of the crowd, the buzzing of electronic servers, all receded, sinking into a faint fog of sound. In Grimes's miniature universe at this moment, only the slow heartbeat in his chest and the image of the distant target remained. Through the multi-layered optical lens system, the distance of 1,200 meters was narrowed down, but it did not appear clear and sharp as on Voss's 4K digital screen. Grimes saw a distorted and flickering world. The layer of air close to the ground, heated by the harsh sunlight of the highlands, was rising to form rolling heat waves that professionals called mirage. The rectangular steel target in the distance looked like it was dancing, the target edges blurring, bulging out then contracting like a living creature. Grimes smirked, a faint smile passing over his rugged face. He understood the problem immediately. The Eagle Eye system, with all its sophistication, operated based on image recognition via pixels. It searched for sharp contours to lock onto the target. But with such dense heat mirage, the optical sensors would be deceived. They would lock onto the flickering shadow of the target rather than its actual position. That was why the machines reported hits, but the bullets missed. They were shooting at an illusion. While Grimes was immersed in silent calculations, Lieutenant Voss's impatient and bossy voice rang out right behind him, tearing apart his concentration. Shoot quickly. We don't have all day to wait for you to catch your breath. The sun is about to set, and the generals are also running out of patience. Or are your hands shaking too much to squeeze the trigger? Voss stood with his arms crossed over his chest, his polished shoe toe tapping rhythmically on the concrete floor provocatively. He wanted to pressure Grimes, wanted to see the old man clumsy and shooting hastily to end this play as soon as possible. But Grimes treated his words like wind passing by his ears. He still maintained his posture, his breathing still steady, like a biological machine, operating in a resting state. He knew if he shot at the bullseye now, even if he truly hit the target, the electronic target system, which was inherently programmed or tampered with, could still report a miss. He could not play by their rules, could not rely on numbers displayed on the enemy's screen to prove the truth. He needed a tangible result, something that no algorithm or lie could deny. Grimes's left hand lightly twisted the elevation adjustment knob on the scope body. Small clicking sounds rang out, sharp and neat. Instead of keeping the aim at the black center of the target, he slowly lowered the barrel. The crosshair in the lens slid off the target face, moving downward, stopping at the solid steel base. There, lying hidden behind the load-bearing bars, was a gray metal box the size of a shoebox. It was the hydraulic controller, the mechanical heart, helping the target automatically stand up or fold down after each shot. The engineers designing this shooting range had armored the target, but they left the control unit exposed because they believed no one would aim at the tiny base at a distance of over a kilometer. That was the arrogance of design, and the fatal weakness that Grimes had seen. He recalculated the bullet drop. At this distance, the 7.62mm bullet would fall more than 10 meters compared to the straight line of sight. He had to compensate for the drop, while simultaneously calculating the wind drift, pushing the bullet to the right. All complex mathematical formulas ran through his brain in a split second, needing no computer, needing no lookup table. Everything was a reflex forged through blood and fire. Grimes's index finger, calloused and rough, slowly placed upon the trigger. He began to apply the classic trigger control technique: inhale deeply, exhale halfway, then hold breath. His whole body turned to stone. His heartbeat seemed to stop in an absolute silence before the storm. Time stretched out infinitely. Voss intended to open his mouth to urge one more sentence, but the words had not yet escaped his throat when, bang, the explosion rang out. Not a smooth, simulated electronic sound, but a brutal roar, sharp and full of primal power. The M24 kicked back hard, the stock hitting Grimes's shoulder with a powerful but familiar thrust. The muzzle spewed out a brilliant orange fireball, blowing away dust and sand around the shooting platform. The sound tore apart the quiet atmosphere of high technology, causing those standing nearby to startle reflexively. The copper-jacketed 7.62mm bullet rushed out of the rifled barrel, tearing through the wind, flying at supersonic speed. It spun in the air, fighting against air resistance and the vicious crosswinds. All eyes poured toward the target. 1 second passed. 2 seconds. The target still stood still. Voss smirked, preparing to unleash a stinging, sarcastic remark about the predicted failure. He was certain the bullet had strayed somewhere, embedding into lifeless rocks and soil, but the smile had not yet fully formed on his lips when a strange sound echoed back from the distance. Hiss. An ear-piercing, hissing sound rang out, like steam escaping from a giant punctured pressure cooker. From the base of the target, a stream of dark red liquid sprayed out torrentially, splashing into the air like the fresh blood of an iron monster that had just been hit by a fatal blow. Grimes's bullet did not touch the target face. It had pierced the metal shell of the control box, shattering the pressure valve system inside. Hydraulic oil compressed at extremely high pressure found an escape route, erupting violently, creating a chaotic scene unprecedented at the summit shooting range. The sudden loss of pressure caused the safety lock mechanism to break. Giant load-bearing springs inside the support frame, which were compressed tightly to keep the target standing firm against storms, now sprang out uncontrollably. Clang crash. The steel target, weighing hundreds of kilograms, was tossed into the sky like a plastic toy. It spun in the air a few times, reflecting shimmering sunlight, then crashed down to the ground with terrible inertia. The impact was so strong that it dragged the support frame to snap and fold. Steel bars, twisting together, forming a pile of distorted scrap metal, lying forlornly on the dusty ground. The result display screen of the Eagle Eye system flashed continuously, numbers jumping wildly, then going dark, signaling a total system error that no algorithm could handle. The entire shooting range sank into a deadly silence. No one said a single word, eyes opened as wide as possible looking at the observation screen, which had just live-streamed that scene of brutal destruction. Arthur Grimes slowly lowered the barrel. He exhaled a long breath, relaxing his body from the tense state. He did not need to look at the result. The sound of destruction was the most melodious music to an old soldier. The thick dust rising from the wreckage of the target frame began to settle, but the silence enveloping the summit shooting range became heavier than ever. It was the silence of horror, when human perception had not yet caught up with the cruel reality that had just taken place before their eyes. Lieutenant Voss stood rooted to the spot, his eyes opened as wide as possible, staring at the pile of scrap metal that was once the pride of automated systems. His lower jaw dropped, his dry lips moved but could not utter a word. The handsome, arrogant face of a few minutes ago was now pale, drained of every drop of blood, looking like a wax statue melting under the harsh sunlight. The permanent smirk, his sharpest weapon, to belittle others, had completely extinguished, giving way to the extreme bewilderment of a man who had just been stripped of all faith. Behind Voss, the recruits also fell dead silent. They looked at Arthur Grimes with completely different eyes. No more mockery, no more snickering giggles. Instead was pure fear. They looked at the old M24 rifle in his hand, the thing they once called scrap metal, now appearing as a holy relic, full of power. In the hands of the elderly veteran, it was no longer a lifeless mechanical tool, but had become the staff of punishment. They realized that the lessons about technology they had been crammed with for so long had overlooked the most important factor, the soul of the gun wielder. On the VIP observation deck, the atmosphere was also frozen. General Holloway, who had witnessed hundreds of weapons tests throughout his military career, slowly stood up from his chair. He stepped close to the bulletproof glass, his hand placed on the cold glass surface, his eyes glued to the small figure of Grimes down on the field. He turned to the attaché officer standing next to him, his voice lowered, containing a respect he had not given anyone for a long time. That wasn't luck. That was long-range surgery. He dissected our defense system with just a single bullet. Down on the shooting range, Arthur Grimes did not pay any attention to the surrounding reactions. He did not turn back to look at Voss to enjoy the victory, nor did he glance at the recruits to seek admiration. To him, the shot just now was merely a technical operation necessary to unlock the truth. He operated decisively, flipping the safety latch of the gun and slinging it over his shoulder. Grimes walked with a limp but agilely toward the central control area, where screens were still blinking, reporting system errors. A young technician, panicked by the sudden action of the stranger, rushed out to block the way. He spread his arms, trying to protect his territory by natural reflex. "Hey, what are you doing? This area is off limits to unauthorized personnel." Grimes did not stop, nor did he argue. He swung his thin arm, hard as cold steel, brushing the technician's hand aside. The strong and decisive swipe made the young man stagger back. bumping into the control console behind. "Move," Grimes ordered briefly, his voice not loud but carrying the authority of a battlefield commander. He took the position in front of the main control panel. His calloused, rough hands with crisscrossing scars began to glide over the modern touch keyboard. He did not look for flashy graphic icons or the user-friendly interface that Aerotech prided itself on. Grimes opened the system manager, his fingers typing continuously lines of old DOS commands, the basic programming language that kids these days probably only saw in computer museums. The large screen displaying the bright yellow error warning logo suddenly went dark. The entire beautiful three-dimensional graphical interface disappeared, replaced by a pitch-black screen with lines of white code running down like a waterfall. Voss woke up from the shock. He rushed over, intending to snatch back control. "What the hell are you doing to my system? Stop immediately." Grimes did not lift his head, his hands still typing continuously. "I am asking it for the truth, and it is starting to confess." After a decisive enter sound, the black screen disappeared, displaying a wireframe bullet trajectory chart in bright red on a black background. This was raw data, what the sensors actually recorded before being smoothed by algorithms for display to viewers. Grimes pointed his index finger at a thin red line running along the firing trajectory. It did not go straight to the assumed target, but was bent subtly right from the moment it left the barrel. "Look, Lieutenant, open your eyes and look," Grimes said, his voice icy. He traced his finger along that abnormal curve. The Eagle Eye system did not miscalculate the wind, nor did it have sensor failure. It was tampered with at the source code level. Someone programmed an additional hidden variable, a 2 mil deviation to the east, for every shot guided by AI. Voss stood frozen, staring at the chart. As an officer, well-trained in technology, he immediately understood the meaning of that number. Milliradian was a unit of angular measurement in gunnery. A tiny deviation at the muzzle would multiply manifold with distance. 2 mils, Voss muttered, his forehead starting to sweat cold. At a range of 600 meters, it deviates nearly 1.5 meters. That is why the first volley missed to the left. Wait, if deviating east, then it should be to the right. Grimes turned to look at Voss, his eyes sharp as scalpels. Exactly. The first volley missed left because the actual wind pushed left, but the computer deliberately compensated more to the right to cancel out, creating chaos. But look at the projected bullet path at 1,200 meters. If you had shot according to the computer's instructions just now, where would the bullet have flown? Grimes's question was like a bucket of cold water splashed straight onto Voss's face. He hurriedly looked up at the digital terrain map superimposed on the bullet trajectory chart. He used a trembling finger to draw an imaginary straight line from the shooting platform, passing through the target, and deviating 2 mils to the east according to the programming of the malicious code. That line extended, crossing the open ground, crossing the safety zone, and its endpoint lay entirely within an area marked in blue on the map. Grandstand A. Voss shuddered, an electric current running down his spine making his hair stand on end. He turned his head back to look toward the VIP grandstand, where bulletproof glass panels were reflecting the late afternoon sunlight. The position where the errant bullet would have embedded itself was exactly the center row of seats, where General Holloway was sitting. 2 mils of deviation at a range of 1,200 meters was nearly 2.5 meters, enough for the 12.7 millimeter armor-piercing bullet of the Eagle Eye system to avoid the steel target, fly straight through the empty space behind, and crash into the grandstand with kinetic energy intact. Civil bulletproof glass there could not stop military armor-piercing rounds. "This is not a technical error," Voss whispered, his voice cracking with horror. "This is not an accident." Grimes nodded, closing the lid of the military laptop on the control console, locking the evidence data tight. "Correct. This is an assassination disguised as a failed demonstration. Your recruits are not test shooters. They are being turned into an involuntary execution squad." The naked truth exposed before their eyes made the shooting range atmosphere become suffocatingly stifling. Voss realized he was not just a failed, arrogant man, but also a pawn in a cruel political chess game, and that chessboard was about to get bloody. The truth about the assassination plot against General Holloway had just been exposed nakedly on the control screen, freezing the atmosphere at the summit shooting range. Arthur Grimes and Lieutenant Voss were still standing stunned before the deadly ballistic chart, not yet able to give any subsequent reaction, when a new incident struck, more cruel and rapid than all calculations. Just as Grimes intended to copy the data as evidence, the control screen in front of him suddenly flashed continuously. The white lines of code he had just accessed were swallowed by a bright red color, blinding and full of threat. The system administration interface disappeared, replaced by a giant warning frame taking up the entire vision with the frantically flashing text, "System error." But that error message line only existed for a split second. It was quickly wiped clean and replaced by a new command line, colder and more decisive, like a death sentence pronounced by an invisible judge. Protocol kill box activated. Immediately, a deep siren rang out, tearing apart the silence of the high mountain region. It was not the ear-piercing safety siren usually seen in drills, but a deep sound, rumbling and shaking the chests of listeners, like the growl of a giant monster just waking up from the underground. That sound carried a low frequency, impacting directly on the nervous system, activating the most primal fear in the mind of every human present there. Arthur Grimes snapped his head up. The survival instinct of an old soldier had smelled danger right from when the screen changed color. He squinted his wrinkled eyes, looking toward the four corners of the shooting range, where four sturdy concrete towers were placed. On top of each tower was an automated sentry gun heavy machine gun, equipped to protect the test area from intrusion threats from outside or destroy hypothetical drone targets. Normally, they lay dormant, barrels pointing down to the ground in a resting state, harmless like steel statues. But right now, they were moving. "It is not turning off, it is waking up," Grimes muttered, his voice drowned out somewhat by the siren but still enough for Voss to hear. The young officer turned to look in the direction of Grimes's gaze, and what he saw made the blood in his body freeze. On top of the watchtowers, the status indicator lights, which were shining a soothing green color signifying safe mode, simultaneously switched to blood red, the red of blood, of firepower, of free fire combat mode. Down on the field, the recruits began to panic. They looked around, not understanding what was happening. The safety procedures they were taught did not mention this situation at all. They looked around wildly, seeking orders from the commander, but their commander himself was falling into a state of extreme panic. Voss rushed to the control panel, slamming his hand hard on the touchscreen, trying to enter the code to cancel the command, but the system was completely paralyzed. All his access rights had been stripped away. "Who is doing what I have not ordered?" The activation of Sentry. "What the hell is the security system doing?" Voss screamed into the walkie-talkie, but answering him was only the crackling sound of static interference. He reeled, sweating like a bath, eyes opened wide, full of helplessness. He was too used to giving orders to machines and being obeyed absolutely by them. Now, when betrayed by those very tools, he became weaker and more useless than ever. In that chaos, a recruit standing near the edge of the shooting range suddenly shouted, voice cracking with horror, trembling finger pointing toward the nearest gun tower. "Lieutenant, barrel. It is rotating." Everyone simultaneously looked up. The massive sentry guns, equipped with 12.7mm barrels and the most modern optoelectronic targeting systems, began to move. The sound of servo motors whining rang out, a dry and cold mechanical sound. These killing machines did not rotate outward to protect the shooting range like the original design. They were slowly turning back inward, the dark, cold gun muzzles, little by little adjusting the angle, lowering the aim. And their destination was not Grimes, nor was it the recruits standing down on the field. 4 gun barrels from 4 corners of the shooting range were converging on a single-point grandstand A. That was where General Holloway and the Acceptance Council were still sitting stunned behind the layer of bulletproof glass, not yet able to evacuate. They were like fish lying in a glass tank, completely exposing themselves to the firepower of machine guns capable of shredding light-armored vehicles. That tempered glass layer could block rifle bullets, but before the rain of 12.7mm bullets from 4 sides, it would crumble like eggshells in just a few seconds. Grimes observed the movement trajectory of the gun barrels, and immediately understood this entire cruel situation. The person behind the screen, the one who programmed the deviation for Eagle Eye, realized his sophisticated assassination plot had been exposed. He did not choose to retreat. He chose the most brutal solution, to cover the tracks, wipe the board. No more witnesses, no more material evidence, only remaining a tragic training accident. Tragedy that the press would spend tons of ink and paper to dissect, while the perpetrator remained safe in the shadows. Grimes turned to Voss, his voice cold and sharp like a knife blade. cutting off the panic of the young officer. They want to wipe out the witnesses, and the general too. This is Plan B. Turn the shooting range into a kill box. No one is allowed to leave here alive to recount the story of the bullet programmed to deviate. Voss heard those words and felt like the ground beneath his feet was collapsing. He looked up at the grandstand, where the general he admired was becoming the target of the very weapon system he always praised. Voss's technological pride shattered completely, replaced by horror upon realizing he had unintentionally aided a monster. The machine guns had completed the barrel rotation process. They stopped, locking the target tight. The servo motor sound died out, giving way to a deadly silence even more terrifying than the siren sound. Laser guidance lights from the gun towers shone straight into the VIP grandstand, forming 4 bright red dots dancing on the chests of the high-ranking officials. Suddenly, the loudspeaker system emitted a synthesized electronic voice, emotionless and monotonous, echoing throughout the valley like the final verdict of the Reaper. Target locked. Fire in 10 seconds. The emotionless electronic countdown still echoed in the thin air of the mountain peak, beating the rhythm for a tragedy, rushing in with unstoppable speed. 10 seconds. That was a period too short for a human to repent, but too long to witness the collapse of the entire worldview one once worshipped. To Lieutenant Voss, these 10 seconds were not measured by real time, but measured by the frantic beating of a heart wanting to burst in the chest. He rushed to the central control console like a wounded animal cornered, hands once carefully groomed to glide over touchscreens, now banging hard on the physical keyboard with violent and desperate force. Shut down, cut all power, cancel the attack order immediately, Voss screamed, his voice cracking with fear. His fingers danced frantically, entering the highest-level admin password string he possessed. He was the project commander. He was the one holding the keys to this digital kingdom. He had the power of life and death over every line of command here. At least, that was what he had always believed until this moment. He pressed the enter key so hard that the plastic key almost shattered, waiting for a miracle, waiting for the system to obey him, as it always did. But the screen did not change its state at all. It did not return to the safe green color. Instead, a bright red text line appeared, flashing teasingly and cruelly, "Access denied." That line of text was like a slap straight onto Voss's face. He tried again. This time he entered the emergency backup code of the Department of Defense. The result was still the same. His administrator account had been disabled. The system no longer recognized him as the owner. In the eyes of the AI monster he was facing, Voss was now just an anonymous user, an outsider with no right to interfere with the sacred mission it was executing. Cold sweat poured out like a bath, flowing down his forehead and collar, soaking his crisp uniform. With no way to intervene via software, Voss switched to the final solution of despair, cutting off the physical life source of the system. He grabbed the walkie-talkie, squeezing the talk button so tight that his knuckles turned white, shouting into the internal communication channel, connecting to the transformer station, located at the foot of the observation tower. "Pull the plug, hurry up, cut the main breaker immediately. Do you hear me? I order cutting power to the entire area." He waited for a confirmation sound, a snap of the breaker tripping, a dying out of indicator lights, but answering him was only the crackling sound of static and the fearful, broken voice of the power technician. "No. Can't do it, sir. I am trying, but the lever is stuck tight. The automatic mechanical lock system has activated. The breaker is locked remotely. We cannot flip it down manually." The walkie-talkie slipped from Voss's hand, falling onto the concrete floor with a dry clack. He stood frozen on the spot, arms hanging down, all strength seemingly drained. His face was drained of every drop of blood, pale lips moving, mouthing meaningless words. Voss slowly raised his head, looking through the glass of the control room, directing his eyes toward the VIP grandstand in the distance. In his head right now were no longer algorithms or charts. His mind was invaded by a single horrific image, the bodies of General Holloway and council members being torn apart by hundreds of 12.7mm bullets. He imagined the sound of breaking glass, the sound of metal piercing through flesh and bone, and streams of fresh red blood staining expensive suits. Those were the people who had supported him, had believed in his talent, had given him the opportunity to stand here today. And now, the very system he insisted they come to see was preparing to execute them. Voss shuddered as a truth crueler and colder than the Colorado mountain wind crept into his awareness. He was never the one controlling the game. He was never the king of technology, as he always deluded himself. He was just a puppet dressed in a beautiful uniform, given expensive toys to distract public opinion. The real mastermind never considered Voss an ally. To him, Voss was just a disposable tool, a name to sign minutes, a face to appear in the press, and most importantly, a perfect person to take responsibility when disaster struck. Arthur Grimes had been standing next to Voss for some time. He did not panic, did not scream. While Voss was struggling with the collapse of his ego, Grimes was doing the work of a soldier. He placed the spare ammo box on the control console, flipping the lid open with a decisive movement. The sound of metal colliding rang out clack clack, pulling Voss out of the nightmare in a split second. He took out ammo clips carefully wrapped in oil paper while speaking, his tone husky. Understand yet? Why do you think they chose someone like you to stand here? You are a sacrificial lamb. Voss turned to look at Grimes. His eyes went wild, filled with extreme bewilderment. He stammered, voice trembling as if about to cry. My name, my career. I will go to jail. They will say, I ordered the shooting. I will lose everything. Even in the moment close to the death of others, Voss's selfish instinct still rose. He still feared for his reputation, for the stars on his shoulder boards, for the bright future he had painstakingly built. He feared losing the title of military prodigy more than fearing losing his life. Grimes did not stop his hands. He picked up a special bullet from the box. It was not the regular lead core ammo used for training. The tip of the bullet was painted jet black, the deadly symbol of the M993 tungsten core armor-piercing round. He pushed the bullet into the chamber of the M24. The sound of the bolt sliding shut, sounding sharp and solid like the slamming of a coffin lid. Grimes looked straight into Voss's eyes, his sharp gaze drilling deep into the shattering soul of the young officer. They don't care about your name. To arms dealers, you or that general are just depreciation costs. You die. They have a martyr hero for media. You live. They will throw you in jail for technical error. Either way, you are a walking corpse. Grimes's words were like knives gouging deep into Voss's emotional wound, peeling back the naked truth he deliberately ignored. He was a sacrificial pawn. The mastermind would sit leisurely, shaking his legs, enjoying the benefits from stock price fluctuations after General Holloway's death, while Voss would rot in military prison. Or worse, another accident would happen to him to silence the lead forever. Despair turned into extreme horror when a mechanical sound rang out right nearby. Zit, click. Both Voss and Grimes whipped around. About more than 50 meters from where they stood, one of the 4 sentry guns, the one closest to the control area, suddenly stopped rotating toward the grandstand. Its electronic brain, controlled by a genocide algorithm, had detected an anomaly. It identified 2 individuals standing at the control center, those trying to interfere with its purge process. In the cold logic of machines, anyone trying to stop the mission was classified as Priority Threat 1. The turret rotated quickly 90 degrees at dizzying speed. The dark gun muzzle, massive like the mouth of a giant python, pointed straight at the glass window of the control room. Voss froze when seeing a bright red beam shining straight through the glass layer, projecting onto the middle of his chest. It was the laser guidance beam, a tiny red dot dancing on the prestigious medals that Voss was always proud to wear on his left chest. Now, those medals had become the perfect aiming point for the Reaper. He looked down at his chest, looked at that deadly red dot, and felt the cold of death creeping into every fiber of flesh. The sentry gun shuddered slightly, the sound of the loading motor roaring up, ready to spew out a rain of metal to wipe out the last 2 obstacles. The bright red laser beam pierced through the tempered glass of the control room, pinning tight onto Lieutenant Voss's left chest like the eye of a reaper seeing through his soul. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Voss felt the invisible heat from that red dot, even though in reality it was just cold light. It was not just a targeting system, but the final judgment of technology upon the one who had blindly worshipped it. Voss's legs, once accustomed to confident strides in the corridors of power, were now heavy as lead. He wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything to escape the stare of that dark gun muzzle, but his body was completely paralyzed. He stepped back unconsciously, raising his hand to cover his eyes, a weak and childish instinctive gesture, as if by not seeing the monster would disappear. But the sentry gun did not care about human fear. The gears inside it had meshed with the command. The electronic trigger had received the fire signal. Arthur Grimes was different. He did not spend a single second on fear. As soon as the gun barrel just started to turn toward them, His old body reacted faster than thought. He rushed forward, using his entire weight to ram hard into Voss's shoulder. The violent collision knocked the young officer away from his standing position, both rolling onto the rough concrete floor right behind a reinforced concrete pedestal used to shield the electrical wiring system. "Wake up," Grimes roared, his voice drowning out the sound of the machine gun motor groaning. As soon as their backs touched the ground, a terrifying explosion rang out, tearing the eardrums. Bang! The first 12.7mm bullet arrived, not with a crisp gunshot sound, but with a terrible collision sound of metal-piercing matter. It flew past Voss's head position by a hair's breadth, embedding straight into the wall behind where he had just stood. Concrete crumbled, splashing out like bomb shrapnel. Blinding cement dust rose, covering a corner of the control room in white. The acrid smell of gunpowder and the pungent smell of stone dust rushed into the nose, making Voss cough violently. He lay curled up, hands clutching his head tight, his whole body trembling like a lost child in the middle of a battlefield. He had never been so close to death. Computer simulations had never taught him about the terrible pressure of shockwaves or the foul stench of death. Grimes scrambled to crawl up, brushing off the layer of white dust on his shoulder. He pressed his body close to the concrete block, eyes still glancing quickly outside to observe the situation. The sentry gun, after the first warning shot, was pausing for a beat to readjust the firing angle, looking for the dead angle of the obstacle. Grimes turned back to look at Voss. The young lieutenant was still lying flat on the floor, hands still clutching the touchscreen tablet, the only weapon he knew how to use. But now it was just a piece of lifeless glass flashing error messages. Grimes grabbed Voss's collar, jerking him up to sit, pressing his back against the cold concrete block. He looked straight into Voss's eyes, his gaze no longer holding pity or mockery, but only the fierce determination of a commander standing between life and death. "Listen, Lieutenant, you are breathing, which means you are not dead. But if you keep lying there trembling, in 10 seconds, you will be a bullet basket." Voss looked up at Grimes, his glazed eyes gradually regaining some focus. He saw a strangely calm expression on the wrinkled face of the veteran. Amidst the storm of bullets, Grimes stood solid as a lighthouse. Grimes let go of Voss's collar, his voice lowering but heavy as 1,000 pounds, each word like a nail driven into the chaotic mind of the young officer. "You have two choices, Lieutenant, right now, right here." He pointed his finger at the tablet that Voss was hugging tightly in his lap like a tattered lifebuoy. "1. You continue to hug that useless toy. You can continue to type, continue to pray to the lines of code that betrayed you. You just sit here and watch General Holloway and that whole council get shot to pieces, and after that, you will die like a coward." Hand still holding the tablet that killed your career. Grimes paused for a beat to let the words sink in. Then he turned, pointing his finger toward a green metal ammo box, lying forlornly about 5 meters from their hiding spot. It was the spare ammo box for the machine gun, full of 12.7mm ammo belts, but next to it were loose ammo boxes for the sniper rifle that Grimes needed. That distance of 5 meters right now was a death zone, completely open and within the observation range of the sentry gun sweeping back and forth. 2. You throw that technological trash away and be a soldier. I need armor-piercing rounds. My M24 is out of ammo. The ammo box is in that crate. I need you to run out there, get it, and throw it to me, right now. Voss looked, following Grimes's finger. He looked at the 5 meters of open ground. It was short, just a few steps, but with the machine gun muzzle pointing at them, it was as long as a lifetime. He looked down at the tablet in his hand again. The screen still displayed the text "Access Denied," full of mockery. This was the symbol of his power, the thing that brought him to this position, his pride. But now, in front of the real gun muzzle, it was light and meaningless. He looked over at the ammo box. It was clunky, heavy, dirty, but it contained life. It contained the only chance for him to redeem his mistake, to save the people he had unintentionally pushed into death's place. The outside loudspeaker system rang out again, the electronic voice counting down each second coldly, cruelly like a hammer blow striking the judgment table. 5, 4. The countdown stabbed into Voss's eardrums like a chisel. Time was running out. The image of General Holloway appeared in his head, not with the distant, majestic look, but the trusting eyes he gave him when signing the project approval. If he died, Voss would live the rest of his life if he was still alive in torment more terrible than death. Grimes did not urge further. He had loaded the last bullet into the chamber, eyes glued to the gap in the concrete block. waiting. He had given the power of choice to Voss. A soldier is not born from schools. They are born from moments of having to choose between fear and responsibility. Voss looked at Grimes, then looked at the tablet. An electric impulse ran down his spine, awakening the survival instinct and male self-esteem. Sleeping under the flashy cover, he did not want to die like a rat hugging a computer. He wanted to live, or at least die like a soldier who tried to fight. Anger flared up in Voss's chest, burning away the fear, paralyzing his limbs. He roared a sound of pain and indignation, pouring all his weakness and delusions into that scream. AAAHHHH. Voss swung his arm high, throwing the tablet hard onto the concrete floor. Crash! The touchscreen shattered, glass shards and microchips flying everywhere. His symbol of virtual power was destroyed by his own hand. No retreat left. No supporting technology left. Only blood and flesh remained. As soon as the sound of breaking glass rang out, Voss rushed out of the hiding place. He did not run with technique. He rushed with instinct. With the desperation of an animal finding a way to live, he headed straight for the ammo box, leaving behind the fake safety. Rushing into the death zone where death was waiting, Voss rushed out from the shielding concrete block with the speed of someone racing against death. He slid his body along the rough, gritty floor of the shooting range, friction tearing apart the uniform fabric at his knees and elbows, flesh burning, but adrenaline pumping in his blood left him feeling no pain. In front of him was the green metal ammo box, lying forlornly in the middle of the open ground like a treasure chest containing life. Voss lunged forward, both hands clutching the lid tight. The military ammo box was carefully sealed with wire and a safety pin, requiring specialized cutting pliers or at least a knife to open. But right now, Voss had nothing but bare hands and extreme fear. He roared a wild sound, hooking his fingers into the sealing wire and yanking hard. The sharp wire cut deep into his flesh, fresh blood spurting out, staining the cold lid red. Voss gritted his teeth, ignoring the bone-piercing pain. He used his entire body weight to press down on the lid and break the lock latch. The lid popped open with an ear-piercing clang. Inside, detachable magazines for the sniper rifle lay neatly beside aggressive machine gun ammo belts. At that very moment, the sentry gun had completed recalculating the trajectory. The servo motor howled, the 12.7mm barrel whipping around in the direction of Voss's movement. Large caliber bullets began to plow up the ground right at his heels. Concrete dust splashed onto Voss's face, stone fragments embedding into his cheeks painfully. The Reaper was chasing him millimeter by millimeter, the sound of bullets striking the floor sounding like the knocking on hell's door. Voss dared not hesitate for even a split second. He grabbed two M24 magazines, turned his body, and used all his might to throw them toward Grimes, hiding behind the concrete block. Shoot, shoot it to pieces, Voss screamed in a broken voice, his shout blending into the hiss of bullets, tearing through the wind rushing in. The ammo box flew through the dangerous space, drawing a perfect arc and landing right in Arthur Grimes's hand. The old veteran caught it neatly with amazing precision. His movements were so fast and smooth that there seemed to be not a single wasted second. Grimes slammed the magazine into the mag well under the gun belly, the locking latch sound ringing out a powerful clack. He pulled the bolt handle back, then pushed hard forward, feeding the first bullet into the chamber. The entire process took less than 2 seconds, skillful like a magic trick of hands that had been attached to a trigger for a lifetime. Voss lay pressing himself to the ground, hands clutching his head, waiting for the explosion of the counterattack. He waited for Grimes to fire at that machine gun, frantically spewing bullets to rescue him. However, when he peeked up, the scene before his eyes stunned him. Grimes did not point the gun toward the watchtower at all. His M24 barrel was pointing diagonally upward, toward the armored command vehicle lying at the edge of the shooting range, completely opposite to the direct threat. Voss panicked to the extreme. He thought Grimes had lost his mind, or was disoriented in the chaos. He screamed, trying to direct the veteran. "Where are you aiming? The gun is over here. It is shooting me. Shoot at the watchtower immediately." Grimes did not waver at all. He rested his cheek on the stock, eyes squinting behind the optical scope, breathing controlled so tightly that his chest seemed to stop heaving. He knew well that shooting at the sentry gun right now was useless. Its protective armor layer was thick enough to resist rifle bullets, and even if he was lucky enough to damage the sensor of one gun, the remaining 3 would still continue to execute the slaughter order. To stop this multi-headed monster, he could not chop off each head one by one. He had to stab straight into its heart. Shooting the machine gun is useless. Must kill the thing that is ordering it, Grimes muttered, his icy voice ringing out amidst the noise of the battlefield. In the scope, he ignored the streams of bullets plowing up the ground, ignored even the chaos of the crowd. He focused on the roof of the central command vehicle, where a cluster of satellite transceiver equipment was operating at full capacity. In the middle of that cluster was a slender antenna pole. On top was attached a small signal light flashing red continuously to the rhythm of data transmission. That was the brain of the hacker, the only bridge helping the faceless person control the killbox system remotely. If that invisible link could be severed, those steel monsters would become piles of lifeless scrap metal. The antenna pole was very small, the diameter only equal to a thumb, and was shaking slightly due to strong gusts of mountain wind. It was a target many times harder than shooting at a human head. Grimes adjusted the windage knob once more. He felt the air current rising from the valley, the thing he had warned Voss about right from the beginning of the shooting session. Now, that very damn wind was his only ally, helping him guide the bullet along a curved trajectory that a computer could not foresee. Suddenly, the machine gun fire stopped. The sudden silence struck more terrifying than explosions. The sentry guns simultaneously stopped rotating barrels toward Voss and Grimes. Their servo motors hissed a long, ear-piercing sound, then halted. 4 12.7mm barrels from 4 corners of the shooting range had completed the convergence process. They locked position rigidly, creating a deadly net of fire enveloping a single-point grandstand A. Voss raised his head, his face drained of every drop of blood. He saw bright red laser guidance beams dancing on the chests of General Holloway and council members. They sat there, motionless behind the glass, like death row inmates, waiting for the execution hour. The loudspeaker system rang out a dry sound of metal colliding, followed by an emotionless electronic voice announcing the final status of the process. Lock on confirmed. The target lock notification of the system rang out like the gavel of a judge, striking the sentencing table. Cold and decisive, real time seemed distorted, stretched out into infinite moments in the perception of those present. On the VIP grandstand, General Holloway looked straight into the dark muzzle of the sentry gun opposite, his eyes unblinking, accepting fate with the calmness of an old soldier. But down on the shooting range, Arthur Grimes had not accepted surrender. In his lungs, air was compressed, his heartbeat slowed down, synchronizing completely with the beat of the gun. His calloused index finger squeezed slowly on the trigger, feeling the familiar slack before reaching the breaking point. Bang! The first explosion tore apart the tense atmosphere. The M993 armor-piercing bullet rushed out of the barrel, carrying deadly kinetic energy straight toward the slender antenna pole on the roof of the command vehicle. But nature at the summit peak was never an easy opponent. At the very moment the bullet tore through the wind to fly out, a sudden whirlwind curled up from the valley, slamming into the armored vehicle body, causing the antenna to shake violently. In the scope, Grimes clearly saw his target deviate by a fraction. In the final split second, the bullet did not miss completely, but it did not hit the center. It grazed the left edge of the antenna pole, tearing the protective plastic shell and chipping a metal corner. The transceiver pole shook violently, the data signal light blinking furiously, but not turning off. The connection remained. The hacker's brain was still in control, and the kill box system, after receiving the fire order, did not stop. The sound of loading motors of 4 sentry guns roared up simultaneously, sounding like the growl of 4 hungry beasts. The 12.7mm ammo belts began to run, the sound of metal colliding with each other, clicking, signaling the first bullets had been pushed into the chamber. Just one more split second, hundreds of warheads would be spewed out, turning the grandstand area into a rain of crushed flesh and broken bone. Voss saw the signal light still on, his face drained of every drop of blood, mouth gaping, intending to scream in despair that it was all over. But Arthur Grimes did not allow despair to exist within his combat radius. He did not flinch, did not swear or show panic when the first shot did not achieve the desired effect. As soon as the gun recoil impacted his shoulder, his right hand left the trigger and grabbed the bolt handle, with a speed that Voss's naked eye could almost not keep up with. Grimes performed a classic rapid reload technique. He yanked the charging bolt back hard, the hot casing flying out, spinning in the air and falling onto the concrete floor with a pleasant tinkling sound. Immediately, he pushed the bolt hard forward, feeding the second armor-piercing bullet into the chamber and locking the latch. The entire movement took place in less than 1 second, smooth and precise like a programmed machine, but soaked in sweat and human determination. This was the famous double-tap technique. but performed on a bolt-action sniper rifle loading one round at a time, an impossible feat for normal marksmen. Grimes did not need to reacquire the line of sight. His body had memorized the position. The feeling of the gun remained intact. He squeezed the trigger for the second time as soon as the bolt latch just closed. Bang! The second shot rang out, overlapping the echo of the first, creating a sharp double sound tearing through space. The second bullet rushed out following the exact trajectory of the first, but this time, Grimes had calculated the additional vibration of the antenna after the previous collision. The bullet rushed straight into the lower body of the transceiver pole, where the metal had been exposed after the grazing hit. This time, there was no luck for the faceless man. The tungsten core armor-piercing bullet pierced through the main axis of the antenna pole. A crackling explosion rang out, followed by a cluster of green electric sparks sputtering out like fireworks. The antenna pole was cut in half, the top part folding over, collapsing onto the roof of the command vehicle, dragging along sizzling electric sparks. The red signal light extinguished instantly. The invisible link between the hacker and the killing machines was completely severed. The effect took place immediately. 4 sentry guns were in a firing state, barrels just starting to vibrate to release bullets, when they suddenly lost control power. According to the default fail-safe mechanism, when signal is lost, the system was forced to cut the electronic trigger immediately. The roaring motor sound suddenly dropped in pitch, and then died out. The dark gun muzzles arrogantly pointing at the grandstand suddenly slumped, dropping their heads like monsters that had just been drained of vitality, returning to being lifeless piles of scrap iron. Silence rushed into the summit shooting range so fast and suddenly that it made people's ears ring. The whistling wind became the dominant sound again, but this time it no longer carried the breath of the Reaper. Voss collapsed onto the ground, gasping like someone who just surfaced from the deep sea, sweat soaking his entire body. He looked at the broken antenna smoking on the roof of the command vehicle, daring not to believe that he and the people on the grandstand had just been saved by an antique rifle. However, the Reaper never leaves without leaving a reminder. Just before the system cut off completely, a sentry gun in the left corner managed to activate the trigger due to motor inertia. A single 12.7mm bullet escaped the barrel in the final split second of chaos. Clang! An ear-piercing metal collision sound rang out from the VIP grandstand, making everyone jump. The stray bullet rushed out at supersonic speed, grazing the bulletproof glass and embedding straight into the load-bearing steel pillar right next to General Holloway's head. The metal rang out, leaving a deep dent, smoking profusely. General Holloway still sat in place, but his face went pale. He slowly turned to look at the bullet mark only less than a handspan from his temple. If Grimes was 1,000th of a second slow, if he did not perform that follow-up shot with such insane speed, that bullet might not have embedded in the steel pillar, and the subsequent ones would have turned this place into rubble. That dry sound was a chilling warning about the fragile boundary between life and death, a haunting exclamation mark ending the horrific performance at Summit. The ear-piercing siren finally died out, returning to the Summit shooting range, the inherent quietness of the high mountain region, but the air was still thick with the smell of gunpowder and shock. Armored vehicles of the special security team rushed in, creating a protective barrier around the grandstand area. General Holloway was escorted down safely, his steps still steady, despite just experiencing a near-death moment. Before stepping into the command vehicle, the old general stopped, directing his gaze toward Arthur Grimes standing silently in the center of the firing range. Without needing any flowery speech, his slight, profound nod fully packaged the deep gratitude and respect for the old marksman, the person who used a classic gun to save a future generation that was lost. Down on the concrete yard mottled with bullet marks, Lieutenant Voss stood opposite Grimes. The flashy, polished image of the technology officer from the morning had completely disappeared. The crisp uniform was now torn to shreds at the elbows and knees, stained with mud, smoked black, and stuck with streaks of dried blood. But strangely, in that tattered appearance, Voss looked more like a real soldier than ever. He walked close to Grimes, both hands raising the M24 SWS rifle, the movement solemn and cherishing as if returning a sacred treasure. His hands no longer trembled with fear as when standing before the machine gun muzzle, but were steady due to a newly awakened awareness. "Sir," Voss's voice was hoarse, breaking in the afternoon wind, sounding like gravel rubbing against each other. "I believed algorithms were God, and that blindness almost made me kill my commander." Voss raised his head, red eyes welling up with tears, but not dodging Grimes's sharp look at all. He continued, every word escaping from the bottom of his heart, full of regret. "I do not ask for forgiveness. I just do not want to continue being a soulless button-pushing machine anymore. Arthur Grimes accepted the gun, his familiar calloused hand lightly stroking the dust clinging to the wooden stock. He looked deep into the eyes of the young officer. In that look, there was no longer the contempt or pity he once had for Voss, replaced by the look of recognition from a predecessor to someone who just matured after a storm. Grimes patted lightly on Voss's shoulder, a gesture of connection between two generations of combat soldiers. His voice warm but firm. The most dangerous weapon is not AI, it is human resignation. When you entrust the power to decide life and death completely to machines, you have stripped away your own humanity. Saying that, Grimes slung the frayed tool bag over his shoulder, turning his back to walk with a limp toward the sun setting gradually behind the Rocky Mountains. His shadow cast long on the shooting range, solitary, but magnificent. He looked back one last time, leaving a brief message. Today, you chose to take back control. Keep it. The story ends, but the lesson remains. Technology is born to serve, not to replace human metal. Do you agree? Please share your thoughts below. Voss stood, rooted to the spot, looking at Grimes's retreating figure until he disappeared completely behind the blur of dust. He slowly bent down, picking up a sharp remaining shard of the tablet that he himself had smashed. He squeezed the glass shard tight in his palm, feeling the stinging pain to remind himself of the naked reality. The light of the end of the day shone on the broken glass shard, flashing a resilient ray of light. A new era began for him from this moment, an era where humans stand above algorithms. The story of the summit shooting range closes there, not with thunderous applause or glittering medals, but with a silence long enough for the mountain wind to sweep away the arrogance of technology. There are truths about human value buried under layers of flashy code for too long, to the point that when awakened by the gunshot of the old veteran, they no longer argue noisily. They just stand there silently, towering and proud like the mountain, forcing all those who once believed in emotionless algorithms to bow their heads and look straight. And there are people like Arthur Grimes. They do not need to be honored early, nor do they need courteous applause. They just need to know that in the moment of life and death, their metal kept history from being written wrongly by cold calculations. If the story about this final rescue shot makes you stop to reflect, even for a few seconds, if you have ever seen someone being underestimated just because of their old appearance or their silence, please stay with us. Press follow and subscribe to the channel right now, so as not to miss the next journeys. Here, we do not tell stories to please the majority, but tell stories that are true to conscience and truth. Because every time you choose to listen to the end, you are contributing to helping precious values that were forgotten have one more chance to step out into the light.